Okay, I wanted to point out just a few things concerning a video today. This is Judging Freedom, Andrew Napolitano, on his channel on YouTube. And I just wanted to look at a couple of things he says. And just for the record, I completely respect and admire Napolitano. And I enjoy listening to a lot of his videos, and I've learned a lot from his videos, but he says a few things in this video that I'm either confused about or disagree with. And when you write things in the comments, a lot of these people, they don't respond to comments. They don't really use the opportunity to teach individuals. They teach at a level of mass, teaching the masses through their videos, but they don't respond really to individual comments or emails. And I've commented and emailed him quite a bit, and I've never once received a response. So this is really the only way I think that maybe he might respond even in another video. So I want to listen to what he says here. And this is concerning the Department of Justice and his their new focus on domestic terrorism. The name of his video is Department of Justice Establishing New Unit Focused on Domestic Terrorism. Okay, so I have read in a military manual that domestic means civil offices. So offices occupied by civil servants. When civil servants work for the government and they receive pay directly from the government for those services, then they come under the laws because they're usually on federal lands doing federal works. So they come under the federal laws. The people off the federal lands are not considered domestic because they're not civil servants and they're not on federal lands. But we'll look at some of these things here in just a minute. So let's play the first part of his video.
Good afternoon, my friends. Judge Napolitano here with a pop-up on Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, January 12, 2022. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm in a freezing cold, snowy northwest New Jersey, where the temperature has been below 20 consistently for the past 4 or 5 days. I want to talk to you today about an announcement made yesterday afternoon by the Department of Justice that it is establishing a new unit focusing on domestic terrorism. What does that mean? Well, that means that whenever there's a political gathering anywhere in the United States of America.
Okay, so he says whenever there's a political gathering in the United States of America. So this is an act outside of the Constitution, because if you look at the way the first part of the Constitution is written, it says, "We the people of the United States." There's no commas in there. There's no indication that they're talking about people outside the United States. Okay, that's the first point. Okay, the second point is united is capitalized. So this is one's own. It's a proper noun. It means one's own. So we the people of one's own United States. This doesn't mean that the United States are the states united, even though the states are united. This is the United States as in particular place, particular people doing particular things. Now, this is important because these people are not the people of an entire country called America. These are people of an agency called United States that is limited in its lawmaking authority and its power and its jurisdiction and the lands to which they can practice things on. So if we read the preamble, it says, "We the people of the United States, in order to do these things for the United States, So the United States is basically a corporation that works for the United States of America. So we, the people of the United States, do all these things for the United States of America, not to the United States of America or to the citizens of the United States of America or to the private people of the United States of America. So what they do is they do all these things to themselves for the private people of America. So private people are Americans. Public people are citizens of the United States, the agency confined to the federal lands. Okay, now let's look at something real quick by the DOJ. DOJ, the Criminal Resource Manual. Okay, this is the Criminal Resource Manual. 666. I'm sorry, 665. 664, 665, and 666 are important sections in this that goes over the parts of land and crimes that can be pressed against someone in America or in the United States. So when I say that the federal laws are for the people of the federal government, that's basically what this section right here is saying. So it says, when instances are reported to the United States Attorney of offenses committed on land or in buildings occupied by agencies of the federal government. Okay, so that includes their instrumentalities. So if they have a federal person inside of a building off federal lands, but in a federal building, working for the federal government, and they have everyone else in that building is like a contractor, then it's still a federal offense when you commit an offense in that place because the person is occupying it. The federal employee is occupying it. Okay, so you have certain areas of the federal government, lands and buildings, where there are federal agents, even when those buildings are ran by instrumentalities. So for example, you have the CDC. The CDC is probably in a federal building or a building rented or leased by the federal government or a building that was purchased and then given to the federal government or sold cheaply to the federal government. Now, there's nothing in the Constitution that allows the federal government to accept certain types of gifts or to pay for things outside of building forts. Okay, we'll look at that in a minute. But federal people are on federal lands, and in some instances, they are in buildings such as CDC buildings. And it's talking about occupied by the agencies of the federal government, which includes the instrumentalities. Unless the crime reported is a federal offense, regardless of where committed, such as assault on a federal officer or possession of narcotics. So it's saying if you go into a federal building and you assault an officer, a federal officer, or you take narcotics into a federal building, then it's a federal offense. Off federal lands, it's not a federal offense. Now, there's some confusion about what a state is and what power the state has. Lincoln took over the states and made them federal jurisdictions illegally, outside the Constitution, unconstitutionally. So the states maybe not apply federal laws, okay? But the federal government has put a lot of federal buildings and buildings belonging to instrumentalities like the Federal Reserve banks off federal lands outside the Constitution in the states. And that's unconstitutional. So the Federal Reserve Bank is unconstitutional, and it's on lands probably donated to the federal government, not by the state, but by some corporation. So if a corporation purchases lands and donates it to the federal government will take that land and then use it for purposes outside the Constitution. But it's still considered a federal building, and if it has any federal officers in it, then it's a federal crime when you commit a crime against the federal officer, or commit a crime that's considered a federal crime. So, for example, it talks about narcotics. So if I were to take narcotics into a federal bank or the post office, it would be considered a federal crime, even though I'm not a federal person. Off federal lands, it's not a crime, okay? Because there's no federal agents off federal lands. Now, if there's a federal agent going from one building to another building and someone assaults him, then that could be a federal crime. The United States has jurisdiction. Jurisdiction, the true meaning of the word, when you break this word down, means the power and authority to do a thing. Okay? The United States, meaning that instrumentality, not the country. It's an agency, okay? It's like an employee that was hired to regulate certain relationships, which those relationships are the law of the land, and those are in the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives the federal government the right to regulate private people. That's why they had to go outside of the Constitution to force private people to pay taxes or get them to agree with it by lying to them and telling them it was a law. Okay, so the United States, the employee has jurisdiction only if the land or building is within the special territorial jurisdiction of the United States. What does it mean by special? Really, I have no idea. Okay, but I know that they have jurisdiction for forts, magazines, arsenals, etc. in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. And so let's look at that article. Okay, and I go over this so much all the time. Okay, to exercise exclusive legislation. So if you go to a military post and you're driving around the military post, it doesn't matter if it's a Navy, a Coast Guard, Army, Marine, whatever. If you go to a military post and you drive around it, there's a fence. And the fence at the very top has barbed wire sticking out. That barbed wire sticks out towards the state land because everything inside the fence is federal land. Okay, so you have inside the fence is federal land, outside is state, and the barbed wire points out to keep state people out, to keep us out, to keep private citizens out because we're not part of it. Okay, so they have complete 100% authority. The federal government has authority on those federal lands. I believe that's what it means when it says special territory. It's the special territory listed in the Constitution. And that's sort of a way of trying to say that there's an authority besides special, besides just what's in the Constitution. But I don't believe there is. I believe the only territory they have is the territory that's specifically stated, which is exclusive legislation in all cases at the seat of the government, and the place is purchased by consent of the legislature of the state. So in the laws, it says that the federal government has to ask the state, even after it joins the union, to allow it to purchase some lands, and those lands can only be used for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Okay, so it's to make all laws necessary and proper for carrying into the execution of those foregoing powers. So the United States are the forts and the seat of government, and it's an agency, and that's where it works and it does the work. And it's an agency for who? America. And America is the employer, and United States is the employee. And when Lincoln came into office, and he was probably put there by the corporations, he was able to use the Civil War to allow the railroads to basically take over the states, or he took over the states using his sort of laws that he says the Constitution gave him the right to do it, and it didn't. And so what they did was the impression that we have these days is that we all live in a country, and that country is called the United States. Now, United would not be capitalized then, okay? And in the old days, they would say the states united to show that it wasn't one's own. It wasn't an agency. It didn't have a constitution. It was just sort of like we're just together in on this. Basically a confederation, a firm league of friendship. But when they wrote the Constitution, they formalized it. They made it formal. And when they made it formal, they made it the United States capitalized the way you see it here. And we, the people, are the representatives that go to the seat of government or work on the forts to do the things listed in the Constitution. And they do these things in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice and domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And they ordain it for the United States of America. So there's a story in this book, Legal Fictions, where they talk about the word sleep and what does sleep mean. And the way laws are written is they're written very vaguely. And because the laws are vague, the agencies and departments can decide what they mean. And once they decide what they mean according to what they need to do or what they want to do. So if police departments want to bring everyone in to the court and make them pay court fees because people don't fight it, and when they do fight it, they lose anyway and they still have to pay, it ends up just being money for the system. So money for the system is good for them because it keeps growing them bigger and bigger and bigger until we get to the point where people think that they live in a country and the country is called the United States and not the United States of America. And some people have a hard time believing this, but if you look at Article 2, it says that the president has 2 jobs. The executive power is in the President of the United States of America. Okay, the thing that the United States works for, it looks like he's second in command of the states. Well, when Lincoln took over, the president basically did away with the second in command and became first in command. But when you look down at Section 2, it says he's the president and commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States, because the United States is an agency, and it's an agency to regulate the relationship listed in the Constitution between America and the United States, and that's the meaning of the law of the land. It's the relationships, not that the federal government is in charge of every private citizen and can make us do whatever it wants. Like paying federal taxes. Federal taxes is for the people on the federal lands. Okay, so the United States is that agency in charge of the land and naval forces, the militia, okay, because the several states are supposed to call the militia into service, and then the president regulates them. He orders them. He puts them in order. He says, I need troops here, I need troops there, I need troops over here. That's what he does. He's the regulator of the land and naval forces when called into service, and the militia when called into services for purposes of war, putting them to work where he needs them to work so that we can be protected in the form of defense, spelled with a C, so that we can live in tranquility, so that we can provide for defense, welfare, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Okay, so sleep, according to legislation, was a word that then could be interpreted. Just like united is also a word mentioned in this book that doesn't mean what people think it means. It can be interpreted. And it's interpreted by the various agencies and people. And if you interpret it to mean that you are under its authority, then it will allow it. Okay? Because it's vague. It's vague and it's meant to be vague. The laws are vague. They're all meant to be vague. They are intended to be vague so that they can be misconstrued. And a lot of people say that the Constitution is vague. The Constitution is vague so that it can be misconstrued or reconstrued or construed in the next generation to mean whatever it is that people need it to mean. So the example in the book on sleep was that if there is a law that men cannot sleep in, or people cannot sleep in bus stations, and there's a homeless man who comes in with his blanket and his pillow, and he lays down, and you can tell he has every intention of going to sleep, but he hasn't closed his eyes. If he gets taken to jail, has he committed a crime if he wasn't actually asleep, even though he intended to sleep? So the second example is if there's a man who is a paying customer and his bus is 5 hours late and he happens to just be sitting in the chair with his eyes closed, is he asleep? And if he had no intention of falling asleep because of the 5 hour delay, it wasn't his fault, and he is a paying customer, has he committed a crime? Has he broken the law? And that's what they mean by the laws are vague. They're vague so that they can be misinterpreted or interpreted, period. And the cop can decide, and the courts can decide, and the courts can decide, hey, well, we need money, so everybody who's looking like they're going to fall asleep, or anybody who closes their eyes or blinks for a really long time, can be brought in and forced to pay fines for falling asleep or sleeping in the bus station. So it's the same thing kind of with the Constitution. So the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice. Now, see, these agents will come off the federal lands, as Napolitano has said in his video, that the DOJ now wants to charge people with crimes for merely gathering together.
You can expect some FBI agents to be among the gathered there. You won't know who they are and you won't know what they're doing. They will look and sound just like everybody else, but they will be there.
Okay, so if federal agents are not allowed off federal lands because they have no authority off of federal lands, they only have authority on federal lands, then when they come to your meetings, they have no right to be there. They have no right to arrest you. You're not a civil servant to the federal government. You're not getting paid by the federal government. You're not a citizen of the United States, contrary to what you believe and what you've been told. So you have now a right to assemble. But what he's saying is now the federal government, it looks like they're going to make a law, or they have made a law, focusing now on domestic terrorism, which they probably won't define. And they'll write the law so vaguely that the federal agents will say, from the Department of Justice, they'll say, or the FBI, they'll say, the law allows us to do this. But the thing that people don't understand is that the law does not allow them to do this off federal lands. So yes, they can infiltrate meetings when people meet on federal lands. Okay? Now, the other part of this is that there's something in the government, like a secret monster, or people call it they call it the shadow government and the corporate government and all these things. Now, people don't. I think people are not quite understanding how big it is. So there are parts of what we think of as government that have absolutely no authority, no jurisdiction. And what they've been doing is they've been contracting with people outside the government to bring them in under an abstract state. Okay, so what do I mean an abstract state? Technically, you're not part of the federal government, but once you sign papers, once you contract with them, once you get your legal birth certificate, your legal name, and your enumeration via the social security card and your driver's license, you're brought in under a fiction, a fictitious state. Okay, and that state then is under the federal government, even though it appears to have been created without constitutional authority. So these corporations are running this fiction with these contracts, these private contracts with private people, I think because the federal government can't actually run it themselves. And so now they have brought your property, your church, your business, your car, your body, your name, all under this fictitious part of federal government as a fiction called the legal system. Okay, the legal system is man's laws, and the way they're written now are completely outside of constitutional authority. But once you agree and you sign the papers, you have made it a law. So if the Constitution, according to Thomas Jefferson, was to expire 19 years after it was written, even if it didn't have an expiration date in it, written in it, it would still expire according to the natural laws. So if it has expired according to the natural laws, then we are completely ran by corporations pretending to continue running a constitutional government. Okay, because when I read the Constitution, it seems to me like all the civil servants that are in Congress now are not even supposed to be civilians. They're supposed to be military people. And I spent a lot of years in the military, and it just sounds very military to me, and it sounds very, because it says senators and representatives are not to be inhabitants of the state when they're elected. Well, then where are they supposed to be? What part of the land are they supposed to be? If they're supposed to be in the state, then they're not on federal lands. So if they're not an inhabitant of the state, then they must be on federal lands because they can't be foreigners. You can't be a foreigner and sit up in Congress. Okay, so there's a lot of fiction going on in our minds, and there's a lot of fiction going on with this shadow government. And a lot of it has to do with these corporations running things as if it were a legitimate government. But when you sign your papers to open your business, when you sign the birth certificate, when you sign all these things, you're coming in, you're bringing yourself and your children and your property in under this fictional legal state. Now, I've done a lot of videos on fictions. So if you're new here and this maybe happens to be the first video of mine that you've seen, you can go back and look at those and get a better idea of what the fiction is. And states can be abstract, meaning they only exist on paper. Or fictions, they only exist on paper. But if you commit a crime that they don't like, when you sign the papers, you agreed to the laws, you agreed that the titles are now laws for you. And when they become laws for you, you agree to be punished when you break their laws. Before you sign the papers, they're not laws and they don't mean anything. So if you have a church and you go and you register your church for the tax credit or whatever they call it, you're registering to no longer have your church be used for any purposes other than what you agreed to in the contract that you signed with the government. So a church would not pay taxes anyway if it's not on federal lands, because taxes apply only to the federal people on the federal lands. So people, they're first taught that they must pay taxes, but to get out of paying taxes, you can register. And that in itself just doesn't even make any sense. You're liable to pay taxes, but if you do this paper, we'll let you out of paying taxes that you're supposed to pay anyway. Or maybe, just maybe, you never had to pay the taxes and they lied to you to get you to register so that you can pay some taxes or have some benefit, but really that just means that they can make you abide by laws that you didn't have to abide by in the first place. Okay, because the federal government has no authority off federal lands. We looked at the DOJ. You can look through the DOJ CRM 665, 664, 665, and 666, and it'll teach you a little bit about jurisdiction. That doesn't mean that you're going to get justice in the courts, because the courts, as I've also showed in another video, will always side with the officer or the department or agency that has gone after you. That's why people can't win their IRS cases in the courts. And if they happen to have won one, good for them, but more people should be winning their cases, because these people have no authority. They have no authority to tax your income when you don't work for them. It doesn't even make sense. It lacks common sense. It lacks reason. Okay, we can listen to a little bit more of this.
Do we really want the FBI next to us when we attend political rallies?
So this is just a way for the FBI to come off. When you sign the contracts, you're bringing yourself and your property in under federal law, in under the corporate law. Okay, you have to sign it, and you signing it makes it positive law for you. Okay, so before you signed anything, it wasn't a law for you. It didn't apply to you. It wasn't for you. You didn't owe a tax. You didn't have to get a vaccine. You didn't have to pay property taxes. You didn't have to pay school taxes. You didn't have to pay road taxes. You didn't have to pay income taxes. You didn't have to pay anything until after you signed the papers. Okay? There's no business tax or anything. Once you signed the papers, included in all those other laws in there is the authority for them to come in and monitor and sit and watch and make arrests. So you gave them permission to have federal agents come off federal lands into your private property. You gave them permission because you signed papers, even if it was for a mortgage. You signed it, you got a zip code, you came into the zip code puts you under commerce. They claim to run commerce, they don't. They only run the commerce on and off the federal lands. Taxes are only off on the federal lands for people who are receiving federal pay. Okay, all of it's because people aren't understanding what they're doing when they're signing these papers.
And how will the Department of Justice decide which political rallies to cover and which political rallies to leave alone?
The ones they don't like. The ones that is going to reduce their size, because they don't want to be reduced. They want to stay big, and they want to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, we all know that we have the natural right to speak freely. It doesn't come from the Constitution. It comes from our humanity, and our humanity is a gift from God. As God is perfectly free, we are perfectly free.
Now, this goes with everything. We are perfectly free. How can we be perfectly free if they can come do to us whatever they want, or they can say, well, the Constitution, if we're perfectly free, how are we having to pay taxes? How are we having to pay imposts and excise? How are they shutting down the economy? And shutting down the economy, it doesn't hurt them, it only hurts us. Wake up.
Excuse me, if you don't believe in God, you can still accept this idea of the origins of our humanity.
Okay, so what I use is the law of nature. Nature. I mean, you can look outside and you can see nature. So if you're somebody who doesn't believe in God, then just look outside. There are still forces at work that create everything that's natural out there, and you're a natural human being, and you're part of that.
Since we are the highest rational beings on the planet.
That's questionable.
In order to be rational, in order to think, we need freedom. And among those freedoms is the freedom of speech.
Freedom is the foundation for every single system, tyrannical or not, that any human being can build. They have to build it on a foundation of being free, because you can't build anything unless you're standing on foundation of freedom first. If you want to build communism, go ahead, but you've got to stand on freedom first.
The Supreme Court has ruled that the freedom of speech needs breathing room. That means the right to make mistakes.
Okay, breathing room means they can expand it and contract it at their will. And I don't believe in most of what the Supreme Court says, because the Supreme Court will construe legislation in the favor of their departments always and forever. And I believe that the Supreme Court, being not citizens of the United States, are supposed to be sovereign people, which will keep the Constitution small and the government small and keep that agency in its place where it belongs. Now they're all citizens of the United States.
That means the right to shout. That means the right to respond immediately to what someone says to you. So freedom of speech is not a scholar reading an essay.
And I don't believe it's something that expands and contracts. It just is. No matter what, no matter where, it doesn't get bigger and smaller at the will of some group of people. It stays big.
Freedom of speech can be you or me on a street corner haranguing a crowd. It could be you or me in the crowd responding to the person doing the haranguing. But when the crowd is populated by FBI agents who are there to write down who's there or take pictures of who's there or record,
so that it can go after you, because don't think for a second that this government doesn't go after people individually. They do.
Who's there, or even to goad the crowd on to doing more of what the speaker wants, that's very dangerous in America.
And the military, believe it or not, is a big part of this. And the military hires contractors. Okay, if you've bought into this idea that there's a separation between the military and the military industrial complex and the civil officers in Washington, then you've bought a lie, because they all work together. They're all working together to enlarge the federal government. And the reason why they're doing this, or how they're doing this, is that the money for the military and its contractors are all approved through Congress and stamped by the president. The president, as commander-in-chief, sets the mission statements for the military. Okay, so in order to comply with the mission or achieve the mission, Congress has to pass the budget. Congress has to give them the money to do it. So there is no, well, it's just the military-industrial complex. No, it's all of them. It's all of it.
Society. I'll tell you why. Because that's called chilling. Chilling is government behavior that doesn't silence you, but it makes you think twice before you speak, for fear that the person next to you is going to record it and report it to his bosses in the Department of Justice. State
having other people go after you. Narcs.
Differently, we have the right to associate, we have the right to speak, we have the right to remain silent, and we have the right to be free from FBI agents surveilling what we're doing. The other potential danger to this new unit in the Department of Justice, sometimes, as we know, crowds can get out of control. We know what happened in Portland, Oregon in the fall of 2020. The crowd attempted to trash a federal courthouse. The local, state, and feds arrested 200 people. Overnight, 100 of those 200 were let go and were not charged. Well, who are they? They were the FBI agents who were in the crowd goading it on. They were the undercover agents in the crowd working for the FBI goading it on. How does the FBI decide which crowd to join and goad on? These are all problems that come about when the government gets in the business of surveilling us, whether it's surveilling us in private on our iPhones or whether...
So here's an example of something somebody said earlier and what he's talking about, and that's that all the phone companies are registered as doing business, just like the churches, just like any business, doing business in more than one state has to register with the federal government. Businesses doing business in a state have to register with the state. And from what I've said, based on what Lincoln did, Lincoln took over the state. So really, you think you're registering with the state. You're really registering with the federal government because it's all like a landslide, a backwards landslide. So the phone companies are registered as doing business with the federal government, and so they have to comply with federal laws. And if the federal laws say you're going to hand over all the information that we ask for anytime we ask for it without a warrant, then in order to run your business in the United States or in America, you have to do these things. And the only way they can open their business and work and make a profit, which is good, it's capitalism, is to agree and sign the contracts. And then anytime they are asked, they're going to hand it over. They're going to hand over everything that the government wants. They have really no choice after they sign the contracts, but without the contracts, they don't have to. So basically what the stupidity of generations before us that has caused this way of thinking that's inaccurate has bound us, and now we're trying to figure out how to get out of it. But to get out of it, you have to understand what the problem is. You have to understand that what you've been doing and what you've been told and what you believe is right is actually wrong.
Surveilling us in public at a rally. The government should stay out of the business of surveillance. I know this sounds harsh. It is not the job of the Department of Justice to prevent crime. It's the job of the Department of Justice to prosecute it after it occurs. And it is certainly not the job of the Department of Justice to cause crime, which we know more likely than not happened in the Portland, Oregon example and in countless others. Judge Napolitano.
So I encourage you to go out and check out his channel, okay? I've always loved the judge. I've been listening to him for years. I've listened to so many of his constitutional talks at some of the colleges. I hadn't gone to the colleges, but I watched them on YouTube or other platforms. I've read a few of his books. So I'm not disagreeing with him. I'm not against him. I love the man. I think he's great. In my eyes, he can basically do no wrong. And I hope he keeps coming out with things. I do disagree sometimes with the way he says some things. We all misspeak. Maybe he misspoke. I don't know. But in America, the federal government does not belong in America. They only belong on the federal lands within the confines of the Constitution. But when we contract with them and sign their papers, we are basically giving them the right to come off the federal lands individually onto our own properties, into our own vehicles, into our own businesses, into our own phones, and telling them that it's okay to do that. And so when you go to get a job at like, let's say the AT&T store, they're required to have you sign the papers, like the W-4, to pay taxes. So why is it that they do that? if you're not required to pay taxes. And that's because they have a contract with the federal government, because they believed at some point in time, or they're all working together for some purpose. They believed at some point in time that that was the law and that's what they were supposed to do. And even though you can find a title that says these things, not all the titles have been passed into law. So there are titles, statutes, codes, and regulations out there that are written but not passed into law and don't apply off the federal lands. So titles are full of executive orders and acts that have been passed into law, but the title itself has not been passed into law and doesn't apply off federal lands. So if you go and you look at the list of titles at the Office of the Law Revision Council, you can see there that many of them have not been passed into law. And those are the ones that require you, in order to bring you in under its jurisdiction, under its power and authority, requires you to sign a contract with them. And they use federal forms as their contracts with private people. If we didn't sign those contracts, we would be, as Napolitano says, for the most part, perfectly free, perfectly in nature and perfectly free. Okay, so I know this video is long, and I apologize for making a long video, but sometimes you have to say things, and this was a good example, I think, of helping people understand the limitations of federal government and the fact that these corporations are using federal forms to contract with you. So I explain it to people as a bait and switch, because these federal forms are used not by the federal government, but by corporations doing business with the federal government to contract, to make private contract with people who, if you didn't sign the contract, you would have never had to come under those titles. But once you sign it, you make the title positive law for you, meaning it's a law. So contracts make the law. And you can look this up in contract law, books on contract law, books on contract law. It'll say a contract is an agreement makes the law. Now, some people have said that there has to be a meeting of the minds. Well, meeting is another metaphor like sleep. It doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean, just like united doesn't mean it's an actual country, that it's an agency, because it's capitalized as a corporation would be capitalized. Now, normally when you're just using the word united, you wouldn't capitalize the word united in a sentence unless you're speaking of a specific place, like Paris, France is Paris is capitalized, France is capitalized, United is capitalized, States is capitalized. It's a place. And where is it? It's the seat of government, and the place is purchased for forts. And who are the people? We the people are capitalized. That's specific people. Those people are the people on those lands, okay? They are citizens of the United States, citizens of the agency. They work for the agency, and they're supposed to live on the federal lands. Okay, so that's it for today. Like, share, and subscribe. Go and watch Napolitano's video. Sign up for his channel if you like. It's called Judge Napolitano. He's got almost 2,000 subscribers, and I almost always make comments whenever I watch one of his videos. So again, like, share, subscribe, and you guys have a great evening. I'll see you tomorrow.